Ladies and gentlemen, walks in, smiles, pauses for applause. Let me ask y'all a question. Have you ever had a man who clearly wants you, but he ain't saying nothing? I mean nothing. No text, no call, no how was your day, nothing. But somehow he's still in your orbit, liking your pictures, watching your stories, popping up when you least expect it. When a man is silent, the first assumption many women make is that he's not interested, that he's ignoring them, playing games, or simply doesn't care. And while sometimes that might be true, the reality is far more complex and often more frustrating. Silence doesn't always mean disinterest. In many cases, it means confusion, it means fear, it means emotional immaturity. And understanding that can save a woman a whole lot of self-doubt, stress, and wasted tears. Men are taught from a young age that showing emotion is a sign of weakness. Society trains boys to man up, to hide their tears, to fight their battles alone. Vulnerability becomes foreign to them, even dangerous. So when a man meets a woman who stirs something deep within him, something real, something powerful, he might not know how to handle it. That craving for connection, intimacy, and love doesn't come with a road. And when he feels it intensely, the panic sets in. His silence isn't because he doesn't feel, it's because he feels too much and doesn't know what to do with it. Now imagine being a man who's never been taught how to navigate emotional terrain, who's never had an example of healthy communication or seen what it looks like to truly express feelings without judgment. Suddenly, he meets a woman who is radiant, grounded, and emotionally intelligent. She asks questions. She wants presence. She expects connection. And instead of rising to meet that energy, he goes quiet, he pulls back. Because to meet her there, he would have to dig deep into parts of himself he's never accessed before. And that's not something every man is ready or equipped to do. Sometimes silence is a defense mechanism. It's a way for a man to protect himself from rejection, from vulnerability, or from revealing his own emotional immaturity. He wants her, but he fears that if she sees the real him, the unsure, unpolished, unfinished version, she won't want him back. So rather than risk that exposure, he chooses to say nothing at all. It's not rational, and it sure ain't fair, but it's real. Silence becomes his shield, his comfort zone, but it's also the very thing that pushes her away. Another layer to this silence is confusion. A man can crave a woman, feel chemistry, and even imagine a future with her, but still be completely unsure of what he wants in the moment. He might not be ready to commit. He might be struggling with past trauma, financial insecurity, or self-doubt. And in that confusion, instead of opening up, he freezes. Not because the feelings aren't real, but because the timing, the mindset, or the internal clarity just isn't there yet. This silence is less about her and more about him not knowing how to process what he's feeling. Emotional immaturity also plays a big role. Some men haven't done the work. They haven't looked in the mirror and asked themselves what kind of partner they want to be. They crave love, but don't understand the responsibility that comes with it. Love isn't just flowers and sweet talk. It's effort, honesty, and emotional availability. And if a man hasn't reached that level of maturity, his silence is a symptom of his unreadiness. He might want her body, admire her spirit, and even envision a life with her, but if he can't show up emotionally, all of that craving sits quietly inside him, unspoken and undeveloped. It's important to recognize that silence in this context is not harmless. It can leave a woman second-guessing her worth, questioning her value, and internalizing blame that was never hers to carry. When a man craves a woman and chooses silence, he creates emotional static. He leaves her interpreting signals that were never clearly sent. And that emotional limbo is not fair to anyone. But it's also not always coming from a place of malice. Sometimes it's simply the result of a man not knowing how to step into the emotional space that love requires. So when a man is silent, it's worth asking not what's wrong with you, but what's going on with him. Craving is not the same as readiness. Desire doesn't always equal action. And silence, more often than not, is a man's way of grappling with emotions he never learned how to voice. It doesn't mean he doesn't care. It might mean he cares more than he knows how to handle. There's this common belief that when a man wants a woman, he'll make it known. He'll pursue her relentlessly, fight for her, make grand gestures, or at the very least express how he feels. But the truth is not always that clean cut. Some men crave a woman deeply, so deeply that it consumes them. Yet they don't know how to express it, not because the feelings aren't there, but because the language of emotion, affection, and vulnerability is unfamiliar territory for them. Craving someone isn't always about sexual desire. It's about connection, about longing, about wanting to be close emotionally, mentally, and physically. A man might look at a woman and see peace, strength, beauty, and everything he's ever wanted, but still fall completely silent. He may fantasize about sharing life with her, imagine conversations, moments, even a future. But when it comes time to open his mouth and speak on those feelings, he stumbles. Not because the emotion isn't real, but because the ability to express it hasn't been nurtured. A lot of men grow up in environments where emotions are not discussed, they're not taught how to articulate longing or how to navigate love that feels serious. They may know how to show affection physically or through actions like helping or being present, but not with their words, not with vulnerability. So when they feel that deep craving for a woman, when she makes their heart beat a little faster, when her voice lingers in their mind, when her smile is the one they look for in a crowd, they get overwhelmed. That craving can be paralyzing if they don't know what to do with it. For some men, silence is safer than expression, because to express something that intense is to risk rejection. To admit, I want you, I think about you, I crave you, is to hand someone a piece of power over you. That scares a lot of men, especially those who have been hurt, betrayed, or made to feel weak for wanting love before. So instead of saying something, they pull back. They stay quiet. They try to suppress what they feel, hoping maybe it'll go away, or maybe she'll somehow just know, without him having to say it. There are also men who express their desire in indirect ways. Maybe he checks in on her in small, subtle ways. Maybe he watches from a distance, supports her silently, or shows up whenever she needs someone. But he won't say, I care about you, or I want you. Not because he doesn't want to, but because he literally doesn't know how to start that conversation. He's scared that the moment he tries, the words won't come out right, or worse, that they'll come out and change everything in a way he's not prepared for. Some men operate in the language of action more than the language of emotion. They think if I'm around, if I'm helpful, if I'm consistent, she'll know how I feel. But the truth is, women often need verbal confirmation. They need to hear it. They need clarity. They want to know they're not just imagining the connection. And when a man stays silent, even though he craves her, he creates confusion, distance, and sometimes even heartbreak. Not because he didn't care, but because He didn't communicate. It's painful for a woman to feel that energy between them, the magnetic pull, the chemistry, the unspoken bond, but then have to sit in silence, waiting for him to say what's on his heart. She might wonder if she imagined it all. She might question her instincts. Meanwhile, he's sitting in his own head trying to figure out how to speak a language he was never taught. The craving is there. The affection is real, but expression, that's where the disconnect happens. So yes, a man may crave a woman deeply and still remain silent, not out of malice, not because he's playing games, but because he hasn't yet learned how to speak the language of his own emotions. It's not always about not wanting her. Sometimes it's about not knowing how to tell her just how much he truly does. From a young age, boys are taught a certain kind of lesson, sometimes spoken, often unspoken. It starts early with phrases like boys don't cry, man up, or don't be soft. These aren't just harmless sayings, they're conditioning. They teach boys that showing vulnerability is dangerous, that expressing emotion makes them weak, and that the only acceptable form of communication is strength, silence, or stoicism. Over time, those boys grow into men who carry that same emotional armor. They learn to suppress, to hide, to stay guarded. And when the time comes to form deep connections, when real emotional communication is needed, they struggle, not because they don't feel, but because they were never taught how to speak the language of feeling. Society often measures manhood by control, by toughness, by emotional independence. Men are praised for being providers, protectors, leaders, but rarely are they celebrated for being emotionally open. They're told to fix problems, not feel them. So when a man is faced with emotional vulnerability, especially in romantic relationships, it's like asking someone to swim without ever teaching them how to float. The desire might be there, but the tools are missing. That creates a tension within him. He might crave love, intimacy, or connection, but the moment it requires him to open up, fear kicks in. He doesn't know what to say, how to say it, or if it's even safe to say it. For many men, emotions are internalized rather than expressed. Anger might come out easily because society deems it masculine, but sadness, fear, insecurity, those get buried. That creates a disconnect when they enter relationships with women who are often more emotionally fluent. Women tend to express, process, and communicate what they feel in real time because they've been given more emotional permission growing up. So when she asks him how he feels or wants to talk about something meaningful, he may shut down. He's not cold. He's not uninterested. He's simply unequipped. It's not that men don't want to be vulnerable. They just haven't been given a safe place to practice it. Many of them have never had a moment where opening up didn't result in judgment, ridicule, or shame. Maybe they tried once and it backfired. Maybe they watched their fathers stay quiet, their uncles suffer in silence, or their peers mock sensitivity. Those experiences stick. They teach a man that vulnerability is risky, even dangerous. So rather than speak on what's in his heart, he learns to keep it hidden. He chooses silence, not because he lacks emotion, but because he's afraid of how it will be received. This emotional conditioning doesn't just affect romantic relationships, it affects every area of a man's life. But in love, it becomes especially visible. Because love demands presence, it demands communication, honesty, and vulnerability. When a woman wants to connect deeply, she needs words, feelings, understanding. But the man, shaped by years of emotional restraint, may not know how to meet her there. He may crave that same connection, but doesn't know how to build it. Because emotional connection requires exposure. It requires letting someone in, letting someone see the messy parts, the insecure parts, the very parts he's been trained to hide. What happens next is often a cycle of frustration on both sides. She feels neglected, confused, and unimportant. He feels overwhelmed, ashamed, and inadequate. But neither of them are wrong. They're just speaking different languages, molded by different emotional experiences. He's been taught that silence is strength, while she's been taught that silence is absence. So his way of being strong looks like distance, while her need for closeness feels unmet. Until society changes the way it defines masculinity, this will continue to be a common pattern. Until boys are raised with emotional literacy, until men are told it's okay to feel, to speak, to open up, many will remain trapped in silence. They'll crave love, desire connection, and feel deeply, but they won't know how to show it. They'll want to say, I need you, I care, I'm scared too. But those words will get stuck behind pride, fear, and generations of emotional suppression. And the sad part is many great connections will be lost, not due to lack of love, but due to the inability to communicate it. Silence in the context of a man who craves a woman isn't always accidental. Sometimes it's intentional. It's a strategy, whether he's conscious of it or not. He may not say the words, but his silence becomes a tool, one that tests your patience, gauges your interest, or even attempts to shift the power dynamic. It's subtle, it's confusing, and it can leave a woman second-guessing everything she thought she knew about the connection. There are men who, when they feel something deep for a woman, won't move toward her right away. Instead, they'll fall back. They'll become distant, less available, less verbal. Why? Because they want to see something. They want to see if she'll reach out, if she'll chase, if she'll miss them. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's just insecurity wrapped in silence. He wonders, does she feel the same way I do? Instead of asking directly, he goes quiet and watches what happens. If she texts, if she calls, if she asks what's wrong, that becomes his confirmation, not her words, but her reaction to his absence. That's what he reads as interest. Other times, it's not about reassurance, but control. There are men who have learned through experience, ego, or even pain that silence gets a response. That withholding attention creates tension. That pulling back draws a woman in closer. It's a power play, often unconscious, where he's not necessarily trying to hurt her, but he's trying to maintain the upper hand. He craves her, yes, but he also fears being vulnerable. So rather than risk saying too much, revealing too much, or losing control of the emotional balance, he says nothing at all. He lets his silence do the talking. And because silence is such a loud thing in relationships, it works. It gets noticed. It pulls focus. In many situations, silence becomes a waiting game. He's not reaching out, but he's waiting for her to do it. He wants to know how much she'll give, how long she'll stay engaged, how deeply she feels, without him having to expose anything first. For a man who is emotionally cautious or proud, this is a way of protecting himself. He thinks, if she comes to me first, I won't look weak. I won't have to be the one who puts my heart on the line. His craving is real, but his fear is bigger. So he strategizes through silence. Some men also use silence to mask confusion. They want the woman, they feel the connection, but they're not sure what they're ready for. Instead of being honest and saying, I like you, but I'm still figuring things out, they pull away and let silence fill the space. In their minds, it's better to stay quiet than to say the wrong thing or make a promise they can't keep. But the woman on the other side of that silence doesn't know what's happening. She's left to decode the distance, and that's where silence becomes damaging. It forces her into detective mode when all she really wanted was clarity. There are also men who use silence as a reset. Maybe things felt intense, maybe the emotions were growing fast, and instead of leaning into it, he backs off. Not because he doesn't want her, but because he's trying to slow things down, take control of the pace, or see if she'll still be there when he returns. Again, this is a strategy. A man who doesn't know how to articulate his needs or pace a relationship with words might rely on silence to do the pacing for him. He pulls back, hoping the space will give him room to think, to breathe, to sort his feelings out. And in that time, he watches her. He watches how she reacts. If she reaches out, if she moves on, or if she waits. None of this makes silence any easier to deal with. In fact, it makes it harder, because when silence is a strategy, it's not about a lack of feeling. It's about how those feelings are managed, controlled, or withheld. It's a game, whether it's rooted in fear, ego, insecurity, or confusion, and the woman on the receiving end of that silence feels every second of it. She wonders if she did something wrong, if she said too much, if she cared too quickly. Meanwhile, he's sitting with his craving, hidden behind a wall he may not even know how to tear down. Sometimes a man will crave a woman so deeply, so intensely, that it shakes the very foundation of his confidence. He looks at her and sees everything he admires: strength, beauty, independence, grace. She's a force. She walks into the room and owns it. Her energy commands attention without saying a word. And while he may want her with every fiber of his being, he also begins to question something silently, internally. Am I even good enough for her? This is the internal war many men face but rarely talk about. Craving someone is easy. Being sure that you're worthy of what you crave is another battle entirely. For a man, silence is sometimes not about indifference or emotional unavailability. It's about self-doubt. It's about fear of being exposed as inadequate. He thinks she deserves better, someone more successful, more stable, more emotionally together. So instead of speaking up, instead of saying, I want you, he goes quiet. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much and doesn't believe he has what it takes to keep her. A lot of men carry silent burdens, unspoken insecurities about their career, their finances, their emotional readiness, their past mistakes. When they meet a woman who seems to have it all together, those insecurities become louder. She might not say a word to make him feel inferior, but he starts to see her through the lens of his own doubt. He compares what he brings to the table with what he thinks she expects. And if he convinces himself that he falls short, silence becomes his shelter. There's a type of pride that many men carry, one that is deeply rooted in how they were raised and what they've seen around them. They believe they have to come correct or not come at all. That love must be pursued only when you're ready, when everything is perfect. Your money, your mental health, your emotional clarity, your purpose. So when they're not there yet, but they meet a woman who makes them feel something rare, they freeze. That craving doesn't go away. It just sits inside them, unspoken, growing quietly. But outwardly, all she sees is distance. And she's left wondering, if he wanted me, why wouldn't he say something? The truth is, he might replay the conversation in his head 1,000 times. He might write and erase the message a dozen times. He may look at her pictures, watch her stories, feel the pull to call her, to reach out, to be near her. But he stops himself, because the moment he does, the moment he opens that door, he feels he has to show up as a man. Not just in physical presence, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And if he doesn't think he can sustain that, he'd rather stay silent than start something he feels he'll eventually fumble. Men are often judged not just by how they love, but by how much they can provide, not just materially, but in leadership, support, and consistency. And if he feels like he's still building himself, still figuring out who he is, that craving for her becomes a bittersweet ache. He wants her in his life, but doesn't want to be a liability. He wants to be her peace, her strength, her partner, but fears he'll be her project instead. And to a man who values his pride, that's worse than not having her at all. So he stays in the shadows, watches her from a distance, and remains silent. What complicates it more is that many women don't even require perfection. They don't need a man to have it all figured out. They need honesty, effort, consistency. But men rarely believe that. They believe they need to impress, to be the answer to all her problems, to be the rock she can lean on. So if he's not ready to be that, he assumes she wouldn't want him anyway. And in doing that, he misses the opportunity to connect in a real, vulnerable, human way. He thinks he's protecting both himself and her, but in reality, he's just prolonging the loneliness for both of them. When a man doesn't think he's enough, he doesn't speak up. Not because he doesn't feel the craving, but because he can't bear the idea of offering his heart and hearing, "I'm sorry, but no." That rejection feels like confirmation of his deepest fear, that he's not worthy of the kind of love he desires. So instead of taking the risk, he chooses silence. He hides behind it. He convinces himself it's better this way. But that silence doesn't mean his feelings aren't real. It means his fear is louder than his confidence. And until he works through that fear, until he believes that who he is right now is worthy of love, he'll stay quiet, craving her in silence while the connection slips further out of reach. A man can want a woman with all his heart, think about her constantly, miss her energy when she's not around, and still go silent. Not because the craving isn't real, but because he associates being with her with stress instead of peace. One thing many women underestimate is how deeply men value peace. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of emotional turbulence. He might be drawn to her beauty, her confidence, her presence, but if every time they interact it feels like a battle, an interrogation, or a storm waiting to happen, that craving starts to feel like a risk. For a man, peace isn't just a preference, it's survival. Life already hits him from every angle. Pressure to provide, succeed, perform, protect, stay composed, keep pushing even when he's exhausted. And when he thinks about who he wants to build with, who he wants to come home to, who he wants to be vulnerable with, he's not just looking for attraction, he's looking for softness, for calm, for someone who doesn't just want access to his time or energy, but who brings him a sense of safety when everything else feels heavy. So if being around her starts to feel like walking on eggshells, or if he constantly feels misunderstood, disrespected, or drained, he may crave her, but he'll still retreat. That retreat doesn't always come with an explanation. He may not say, "You stress me out," or "I don't feel emotionally safe with you." Most men don't even have the language to describe it. What they do know is what their body and spirit feel. And when those feelings are tight, anxious, or frustrated, they pull back. He'll go silent not because he wants to hurt her, but because he's protecting his own energy. He doesn't want to argue. He doesn't want to explain himself for the fifth time. He doesn't want to feel like he has to defend every move he makes or every decision he takes. He just wants peace. Sometimes a woman may not even realize she's being perceived as drama. She might just be expressing her feelings. She might be seeking reassurance. She might be trying to create connection. But if it's always intense, emotional, confrontational, or rooted in blame, it starts to feel like an emotional burden rather than emotional bonding. And most men, even the ones who love hard, will start to equate silence with relief. It doesn't mean they don't care. It means they've chosen their peace over their craving. This isn't about blaming women for being emotional or expressive. In fact, communication and emotional honesty are essential, but when expression starts to feel like accusation or emotional chaos, when a man feels like he can't ever do right or is always one misstep away from a meltdown, he begins to emotionally shut down. He may crave her deeply, but stay away simply because it feels too expensive, energetically, mentally, emotionally. This doesn't mean men are fragile. It means they're human. They get tired too. And if being around someone consistently drains their energy, reminds them of their shortcomings, or feels like constant correction, the connection, even if it's strong, starts to feel unsafe. Love alone isn't enough to keep a man engaged. If that love is wrapped in pressure, criticism, or a lack of peace, his silence will become his escape route. There are men who will stick it out, hoping things will calm down. They'll try to meet her where she is, try to fix what's wrong, try to understand what she needs. But if the relationship keeps feeling like a storm, they eventually stop trying. They start distancing themselves in small ways, responding slower, talking less, staying busy. And that slow fade is often mistaken for indifference when it's really exhaustion. He doesn't want to leave, but he also doesn't want to lose himself in the constant emotional roller coaster. Peace for a man isn't just quiet, it's acceptance. It's support without judgment. It's knowing that he doesn't have to be perfect to be loved, that he can come as he is, flawed, tired, figuring it out, and still be received with softness, not scrutiny. When a woman offers that kind of peace, he doesn't just crave her, he clings to her. She becomes his safe space. His silence becomes presence. His distance turns into devotion. But if he starts to associate her with drama, even if he loves her, even if he dreams of her, he will eventually choose his peace. A man who craves you and stays silent isn't always confused or playing games. Sometimes he's simply trying to protect the last bit of peace he has left. And if he's been through enough in life, he's learned that craving can be dangerous when it costs him his calm. He knows love shouldn't come with chaos, and if the two are tied too closely together, he'll walk away, not because he didn't feel deeply, but because he felt too much, too often, with too little peace in between.